Hello, Bas. Long time no speak. How are you?
Hey, Worstek, thank you for having me. All is well over here. How about you?
Yeah, man. It's been a long day so far, even though it's the beginning of the day. But I'm good, thanks. So for
It's
those,
for those of you who are listening, it's noon now.
so for those of you who haven't heard about Bas yet, would you be able to tell a bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm going to try and keep that short because I don't think it's all that interesting. But yeah, I'm Bas. I'm from the Netherlands. I've been in testing and more specifically in automation for 17 years now. Started out with a large consultancy company, then moved to a smaller consultancy company, and for the last 8, maybe 9 years, I've been independent consultant. Done lots of projects with different clients all over the Netherlands, and even some of them outside of the Netherlands. And especially in the last, say, 4, maybe 5 years, I've also branched out into a bit of public speaking, a bit of writing, um, and training is a significant part of what I do these days as well. But everything focused around mainly around automation.
Awesome. And you've recently, we actually started talking about this literally 5 minutes ago before we started recording. You've started restassured.net. And
Yep.
when was that? That was like, what, 6 months ago, 12 months ago?
No, not even 12. So I think I released the first version either in September or in October of 22. So I'd have to look that up, but it's been, say, 6 months.
Awesome. And how's that going? So that's a test automation framework, right? And it's based on, the idea is based on rest assured for Java, I'm
Yeah,
guessing.
it's a port of rest assured in Java for C Sharp. That's the long and the short of it. It's going very well. So I started that um, for two reasons, actually. One of them was that I love rest assured in Java. What I like about it most is um, it's DSL. So um, the fact that it's relatively easy to read and to write and to explain to others. So I've done a lot of rest assured workshops over the last couple of years, and what I like about it is that it's fairly easy to teach people how to use it, because the syntax is really readable and really intuitive. So even when people haven't written a lot of Java in their life, it's fairly easy for them to get started with it. And it's still code. So it's basically an abstraction on top of an HTTP library. You combine that with a test runner. So in Java, that would be JUnit or TestNG probably. And it's still code, and you still have all the benefits and um, the benefits of being able to extend it and to make it easy to put it on a version control, to run it just as you would with other types of tests. And it's easy. It's, again, relatively easy to get started using it. So that's what I love about Rest Assured. And I've been working with C Sharp more and more often over the last couple of years. And what I noticed, there are a couple of great HTTP libraries in C Sharp, most notably REST Sharp, which is a very, very, very popular library. But that's more of a general purpose HTTP library. Basically, it's not specifically written with testing in mind. You can use it to write tests. I've done that. I've run workshops on it. So you can do that. But it's not very specific for testing. That's what I like about Rest Assured. So I thought, well, maybe there's a little bit of space, that there's space for a library that solves that problem. And then the second reason was I was just looking for a project basically to hone my developer skills a little bit more. To do, I've done some small development projects for a platform called Test Project, which is now um, end of life, sadly, owned by Tricentis. I've done some development work for them, developing a couple of SDKs in Python and in C# as well. And I was looking for another project where I could just do some development work again. So combine that with me liking Rest Assured and me seeing that space in the C# ecosystem for well, maybe there's place for another library that can help developers and testers make it a little bit easier to write tests for their HTTP-based APIs, and that's where you get restassured.net.
Awesome. Yeah, it makes total sense to me. So rest assured, and Java's got very high adoption, right? Pretty much
Yes.
everybody knows about rest assured, right? If you talk about Java and API testing or HTTP testing. And you also started mentioning that you see this kind of gap in the .NET market where there's a lot of things happening in the Java world, Python world, and JavaScript, but not as much on the open source front in .NET or C#.
Maybe not so much, but in this specific little corner of the C# ecosystem, I think there was room for a library that makes it easier again for testers to write tests for their APIs. And I think and that's again one of the things that Rest Assured in Java does really, really well. So I thought, yeah, well, why not make a port it to C#? So I had a bit of a discussion with the creator of Rest Assured about that, first of all, to see what he thought about it, and he thought it was a brilliant idea. So and then he also immediately said, which what I love, the total honesty is well, please, by all means be inspired by the DSL, but please don't be inspired by the way I actually build it, because if I would do it now. So you need to keep in mind that Rest Assured's been around since 2008, I think, something like that. So it's been, that's 15 years. That's a long time.
Yeah, they need to be backwards compatible and everything, I'm guessing.
Yeah, so it's grown and grown and grown, and I've got the benefit, well, that it's really mature, so I can just avoid maybe all of the awkward decisions that were made for Rest Assured a couple of days, but that's basically what I did. So I tried to provide a similar DSL, and in a lot of places it's a very similar DSL to the Java Rest Assured, but do my own implementation of it under the hood, so to say.
That makes sense, especially that it's also C#, right? So I'm guessing you're using a different library that's got a different API anyway.
Yeah, no. So it wraps the native C# HTTP libraries and classes instead. So yeah, you have to. Some things are just different, but the good news is that everything so far, at least, that I want to do with the library are sort of kind of supported by the C# HTTP client, which is what Rest Assured wraps. So it's there's not a lot of things that I really had to build myself from the ground up.
Got it.
Which makes it makes a lot of things a lot easier. Yeah.
Got it. So you've been around for almost 2 decades now in the test automation space, and
don't say that. That makes.
I'm trying to build up, how much experience you've gathered.
I'm still getting to terms with 16. Oh no, it's 17 years, and now it's almost.
Yeah. So you've seen. Let me rephrase that. Then you've seen a lot of things in your career. when it comes to software testing. And I'm wondering if you apply that, let's say, if you look at 2023 with your experience, which of the trends that you can read about on the news, etc., which of those do you think make sense, and which of those automation testers should be looking at?
So, and I'll leave this up to you to decide, or to the people who listen to this to decide, but maybe you're asking exactly the right person or completely the wrong person. Because I don't do trends really well. And let me explain. So sure, there's a lot of developments going on in testing, in automation, in software development in general. A lot of it revolves around AI and chatbots and all that kind of stuff. But there's and clouds and well, all of those things that we've been talking about for a while. But that have, and especially again with the AI, it's taken a big flight this year and last year. The sort of kind of the one of the benefits I think you get from being in this space for a while is there's been a lot of things that have come up and that didn't turn out to be as popular as they. You get perspective. That's the word I was looking for. A bit of perspective. So what I focus on these days, in mostly in my in development of my own skills and what I want to grow, but also in what I cover in my training and what I talk about, is more fundamental skills, really. So I'm happy to leave the talk and the debate about trends to others. I have an opinion about things like AI and stuff, but it's not something I think about or that I'm working with on a daily basis. So I'll happily leave that to others. What I do focus on mostly is things that are almost anti-trends, for lack of a better word, is get people, because I think that's where a lot of the people, especially in the automation space, still have a lot of, well, let's call it room for improvement, is in the more, especially in the more fundamental software development. So a lot of people who are moving into automation these days are great testers. But just being a great tester, it's a great start, because again, automation is all about supporting software testing with tools. But it's not enough, because now you also need development skills. And by the way, I just want to mention that once again. I keep mentioning that that applies that applies equally, even when you're using the what people call low-code tools. Don't get me started on codeless, because we haven't got enough time. But you're still creating software, which means you're still going to benefit from having fundamental software development skills. And that's what I talk about a lot these days. It's the stuff that we did in the 80s and the 90s and the zeros, maybe. Object-oriented programming principles, solid principles, clean code, that kind of stuff. I don't think that counts as a trend. So, and that's what I focus on. That's what I spend a lot of time practicing for myself, talking about, reading about, thinking about, writing about, teaching. So, and that doesn't leave a whole lot of time for trends, actually. And I think, in all honesty, it's personally, I think it's a good idea for a lot of people to spend a bit more time working on those fundamental skills, and then from that solid foundation, or that solid skill base, maybe, um, then try and explore and run after new tools and new trends and stuff like that.
Got it. Yeah, that makes total sense to me. So there's a base which will help you test automation people to even judge the trends. So there's one way of following the trends. You just bluntly see what's on the news and follow them, right? Everybody's doing that. Well, we're just going to do that as well. What I'm hearing from you is there's certain underlying principles that haven't changed since the 60s, 70s, 80s through 2000s, and they just keep on popping up. And if you have that skill set under your belt, or those tools under your belt, it makes you a better test automation engineer. You're not that just a person that automates tests. You're becoming an engineer that's engineering solutions, and your tests become, first of all, you're better at writing them faster. You get to the solutions faster just because you have those tools under your belt, but also you're writing more maintainable tests.
Yeah, exactly. So it always saddens me a little when I see people on LinkedIn, for example, where their profile headline says automation specialist in Selenium with Java and TestNG, for example. And this could have been any programming language, UI, automation library, and test runner, by the way. So don't be offended if this applies to all, because it's so specific. But for all of those three things, so we have Selenium, Java, and TestNG. Those are just singular occurrences of a family of tools or libraries, or in the case of Java, languages. So what I try and focus on in my own learning, but also in teaching others, is don't just teach them Selenium, teach them principles of UI automation. So you need to be able to find elements. Well, guess what? You need to do that with Selenium, with Cypress, with Playwright, with Robot Framework, with any kind of vendor-based low-code UI automation tool. You need to be able to identify elements on the screen. Then there's stuff like weighting and synchronization. Okay, with Selenium, you need to do a little bit more work yourself, whereas libraries like Playwright or WebDriver.io or Cypress does some of the lifting for you. Not all, but some. But those are concepts. And if you understand those concepts, learning Selenium or Cypress or Playwright or WebDriver.io or Robot Framework or whatever kind of tool is much easier. The same applies to a programming language. So instead of focusing on all the syntax and the tricks and the nuts and the bolts of Java, I like to talk about object-oriented programming, because a lot of those principles, they translate to C#, to Python, to JavaScript, to Go, to whatever language, really. And being able to take a step back from, oh, this is how I do it in Java, to, oh, this is the problem I'm trying to solve, and this is the object-oriented programming way of solving that, you'll be able to address the same problem and the same challenge in any other language. I sometimes joke in talks and in classes, well, I teach you what to Google. So if I want to know how to do it in something specific in Java, I Google it, and Stack Overflow will tell me, or now ChatGPT will tell me. And if I want to know how to solve that in C# or in Python, I just need a different search query. But I need to know what is the problem that I'm solving, and what object-oriented programming principle can I use to solve that problem? And again, the same applies to your testing frame, your test runner. So is TestNG better than JUnit? I don't know. I don't care. Lots of people spend lots of time and energy on that debate. I say, well, it's a test runner. It allows you to discover and run tests, perform assertions, and it does some basic reporting. And again, if you understand that and know how that works, you can do that with NUnit or MS Test in C#, with PyTest in Python, with Jest or Mocha or Jasmine in JavaScript, whatever.
Yeah, it makes total sense.
Yeah, it makes you and so taking that step back and focusing a little bit more on what's and the question, also almost the question behind the question, the problem behind the problem, and understanding that, I think, makes you a much more versatile automation engineer or developer. It applies to development in general. It applies to lots of different things, really.
Oh, it makes total sense to me. The example you mentioned resonates as well, like JUnit versus TestNG. So those are tools that can do pretty much the same stuff. You could argue in some context, one is going to be 5 or 10% better. Unfortunately, the way you write your test actually accounts for 90% of the effectiveness of your use of JUnit or TestNG, right? You can write shitty tests in TestNG and JUnit, or you can write awesome tests in TestNG and JUnit, and that accounts for 80 to 90% of the effectiveness of your test automation, right? If you're just focusing on those two, rather than focusing on, well, I'm going to use TestNG and it's going to help me 5% in this specific case because it's got these 2 or 3 more features. Yeah, that makes total sense. It brings me back to the discussions we have at Traffic Part as well, actually, from what we see with our customers, which is you see these trends like microservices, for example, or AI testing. And if you've been, like you say, long enough in the market, you see is the same stuff just wrapped in a different name, right? So let's say if you go back to the SOA architecture, the principles were very similar to the principles of the microservice architecture, which is loose coupling. You have components that are loosely coupled, and high cohesion, which is you've got components that are responsible for a set of functions that is a cohesive unit. And you apply, I guess those are the principles you're talking about as well, because like solid, Yagni, and dry, and all those principles are kind of derivatives of those two, right?
Yeah.
And you know, you see that. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Just to finish my thought. So, you know, you see, so what we see is with some companies that they use, let's say, microservices. It's like a hammer, right? Just a different type of hammer. You can use it to solve different types of problems. But sometimes a monolith is the right solution, actually. And just because we're using the microservices hammer comes with its trade-offs, right? It's a special kind of hammer that has a lot of network connections. With going back to test automation, you have to actually test very thoroughly, because one network connection can bring down your whole microservices stack if it's poorly implemented, like timeouts, etc.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it's I like your perspective here a lot, that there's these underlying principles that have been proven over and over to be actually immutable, like the solid principles, or dry, or Yagni, or domain-driven design, etc., etc. And they underline most of the software development activities, being using no-code tools, low-code tools, high-code tools. Those principles will have to apply there as well. If you're gonna not repeat yourself in your REST-assured.NET test, why would you repeat yourself in the no-code tool, right? So it makes total sense to me.
Yeah, and just to expand on that a little bit, and I had this discussion with others online, as you know how these discussions go, and it's so a low code or a codeless tool. It's just an abstraction layer on top of the actual code, and abstraction layers typically make it a bit easier to use something at the expense of flexibility. often. So, and some abstraction layers or low-code tools get that right. So you still have, so they do make it easier for you to use um, your to write tests, but they still there's enough flexibility left to actually easily do the stuff you actually want to do, especially when your scenarios or your tests or whatever it is that you want to build get a little bit more complex.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you can have the no code abstraction or low code abstraction actually get in the way of producing maintainable tests.
Sometimes it does, yes, and that's a fine line, and where you draw that line, that's I don't envy people who design and build those tools. I'm actually working with one of them in sort of kind of a consultant way, and I'm having a lot of those discussions about these kinds of things, about how far do you want to go, what's your audience, and because I think a lot of it depends on what's the target market that you built this for, and because the nice thing is they're the product that they're building, I'm probably not in their target market. But
it's interesting they're talking to you then, right?
It is, but just as a general sounding board consultant like thing, because again, and I think that that's one of the things that tends to come with with just years of experience, and B with having been a consultant all my life, so I've seen lots of them work with lots of different teams and lots of different contexts. You get perspective, and it's easier for me now than it was, say, 10 years ago, to see things from somebody else's perspective and say, well, maybe that would not be my preferred way of working, but I can see how this works best for the context of the client that I'm working with, for example.
That makes sense. And I guess with rest assured, going back to the levels of abstraction, so rest assured versus low code or no code, what I'm hearing here from you is you're not going many steps up in the levels of abstraction. You're just going one or two levels up. So you still have the flexibility of the programming language, and you have still access to the DSL to manage pretty much most of the things that you would wish for when you're doing REST services testing.
Yep.
And the challenge, though, so that's the power of the stool and why it's so widely spread. But then the no-code or low-code tools, when they come in, the challenge they have is they just go 2 or 3 levels even up in levels of abstraction, and they just have to make certain trade-offs. And like you say, it's like, well, who's our audience? Maybe let's make the trade-offs that roll out some of the other people and just focus on this group. And because we have to have some trade-offs to be able to go so high in those levels of abstraction.
Oh no, that's exactly it, and that's the point I've been trying to make for a while. Not in this conversation, but it seems like we're on the same page there. But in general, for myself, it's what I've been talking about a lot, thinking about a lot. Is exactly this. And I don't want to take credit for the design. Again, I'm porting something that already exists and that does a good job just for a different programming language. That's what I like about Rest Assured, for example, is that it gets that trade-off right, in that it's easier to use than writing your tests directly against the HTTP clients in Java, which you can, if you want to do that, that's absolutely fine. I just like the Rest Assured takes away a lot of the boilerplate code while still leaving enough flexibility to do the things that you typically want to do in those kinds of tests. Okay, and you still need to be able to write code. That's true, but it makes it a lot easier. So there's fewer things you have to learn compared to, again, writing code directly against HTTP. but your programming language itself is also a form of, especially newer generations of programming language, 4GL languages are abstraction levels as well, because I learned to program in assembler in university. I don't ever want to go back to that, but I did, and so and these newer programming are also an abstraction layer, and then you've got libraries on top of that, and then you've got the tools in the low code space that do yet another layer or a couple of layers of abstraction. And again, it's all about what's the target market and the target audience, how much flexibility do you lose, and does do the gains that you get from and making it easier to use, because that's typically what abstraction layers do. It makes it easier to use stuff. And how's that balance between those two? And some tools get that right. Some tools generally struggle a bit, but a lot of that again also depends on who is going to use that and in what context is that going to be used, or for what purpose is that tool going to be used. So it's one of the reasons why I'm so fed up with the my tool is you better than your tool kind of discussion, because there's an audience and a target market for all these tools, really.
Yeah, what is the context your tool is better at? Like you've got a race car that's going to be better. Well, maybe, right? It's faster, but than a truck,
Yeah.
right? But the truck might be actually better if you need to, get some concrete to the construction side, right? So what does better mean?
And even with race cars, so this race car might be faster on the straight, but the other might have better handling in the corners.
Exactly.
It's yeah.
I think the programming language makes sense to me as well. So I think what we touched on there is that it takes a certain level of maturity of the people that design these abstraction layers, and a certain level of experience, feedback from the market. Let's say Java, for example, right? It's built on top of the bytecode, which is built on top of, let's say, the assembly level, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like how long would it take, let's say, you and me to figure out what's the Java API on top of that assembly language that we used back 20 years ago, right? I mean, I don't think I would take personally that challenge to come up with a Java 1.0 API for developers, right? So that seems like an awful complex task for people that have, let's say, the insight into and the engineering skills and the experience on enough projects to be able to come up with something like that. But that in turn allows us to right now use Java and C# instead of assembly. So because those smart minds put effort into designing these abstraction layers, we can actually benefit from them. And I guess part of the argument you're making here is that the local testing tools maybe that's maybe why you don't I lost the word here. So you don't necessarily you see the low testing tools as let's say low code testing tools. That's a possibility in certain contexts, but it takes, looking at, let's say, Java and .NET, it takes so much engineering skill to design an abstraction layer on top of a lower level layer that in the low code testing tools, you'd need probably similar levels of engineering skills to design that abstraction layer. And maybe those ones that we see today are not, those tools that we see today are not being the investments needed to be made in those abstractions layers are not there, right? They're kind of, at least the tools I see, they're like just replication of what you see in the programming level just through clicking through stuff, right? Just a subset of what you could program just clicking through stuff. But what we're talking about, looking back at Java APIs or .NET APIs on top of assembly, in bytecode, those are actually totally different APIs, right? Like if you
Yes.
look at back at programming assembly, you're talking about moving stuff in and out of registries. You go to Java and .NET, you're suddenly talking about objects. There's no registries, right? You're talking about the mutexes when it comes to locking things. There's no this is operating system level stuff that's exposed on a totally different API. And I'm guessing what I'm hearing is there's like a bit of that is missing, that engineering is missing in the low code testing tools. Because
not in all of them, but it's definitely what makes it hard to do this well, I think, is that it's a complex problem. That doesn't mean I want to disqualify all of those tools, because there are some great tools out there that get it right, and they're obviously addressing a problem, or else nobody would even think of developing, because it takes a lot of time and a lot of money and patience and deep pockets to get something off the ground with it, and which you probably know, with being so heavily involved in traffic parent. It takes a lot of time and effort, and you know that better than I would. I never start something like that.
You would not, sorry?
I would never even try something like that. Start a project like that, because, well, it's I've seen sort of how much it's a lot of hard work, and then you hope that at some point it takes off, at least in some segment of the market. But that's definitely not success is not a given. It's a lot of hard work. So, but there are a lot of. I don't want to disqualify that, not at all. And there are some great tools out there in the automation space, in the space that traffic, in the low code development platforms.
We're, by the way, so we're not calling ourselves low code just yet, right?
No,
We're on our way there,
no,
but
I didn't try to. I didn't want to put you in that, to label you that way, as a low code platform. But it's just, there's so much going on, and there's so many super smart engineers trying to address all of these problems, make the problem of, and in the automation space, it's a lot of them focus on, which is again something that I sometimes struggle with. Almost all of those tools, and especially the tools that tout well look at as leveraging things like AI and all that stuff, they focus on UI level automation. And UI automation is valuable when done well. And that's a big when, because it's hard. It's also, and that's, I'm trying to put a little bit into the things that I tend to talk about. So it's what I don't understand still. And on the other hand, I do completely understand, is why people who are relatively new to the automation space, they all start with UI automation. That's the first thing they pick up and they try to learn. When it's by far the hardest form of automation there is to do it, and to do it right. And I think one of the reasons is, first of all, when you do UI automation, it's typically done in a full stack end-to-end fashion, which means that there's a gazillion different moving parts that all make it much harder to get this stable, and to get this right, and to get this relatively fast. Plus, the UI is the only interface in an application that's explicitly being written to be consumed by human beings. So, and there's a lot of very smart front-end developers who do great things in making things look very visually appealing to human beings. But at the same time, a lot of those things, a lot of these techniques that they apply, make it a lot easier, or sorry, a lot harder to write reliable UI automation against because of all the in-browser, client-side, asynchronous stuff that's happening. And which is one of the reasons why it's so bloody hard to get this right. And then you have these people who try and address the problem of and try and make the UI automation creation and running and maintaining of UI automation easier. Some of them through low-code platforms. A lot of them at least claim to use AI these days. Do they? Well, that's up for debate.
I like that as well. Claim to use AIs. We've got competitors that that use AI, right? And I've never been able to figure out what type of AI it is. I actually was going back to what I've learned 20 years ago in the uni. Which type of AI are you actually using here? Sorry, go ahead.
I don't understand AI well enough to have a proper opinion about that. So I'm happy to leave that to others. But and that's why I think it would probably be a good idea if more people focused on how could we maybe do a little bit less of that UI and replace that with integration, API level testing, maybe covering things in unit tests. And yes, that requires a different skill set. And looking a little bit deeper into your application and learning how to read and write code and having other different kinds of conversations with your developers, which again is a skill set. Not because developers don't communicate, because they do, but their perspective on things and the things they think about and talk about are just a little bit different generally. So I think instead of focusing on making it easier to create UI tests, I'd rather focus on making it easier to write tests that don't necessarily require the UI. And if they require the UI, for example, to use libraries or tools to abstract away or mock or simulate, whatever you want to call it, everything that's behind that to make that problem smaller as well. Because the full stack UI automation, it's the biggest problem to solve in automation. It's the hardest problem to solve in automation. And almost everybody starts there, which is still, and I started there as well. That's what I've been doing for the first 7-8 years of my career. And it's only after that I said, oh, but there's stuff going on below the UI. Oh, that's interesting. So that took me a while as well. But I'd hate to see, but unfortunately I still see it a lot, is people are new to that, then going to the UI, doing that, and again, on the other hand, that's understandable because that's what they know, that's what they're familiar with, that's what people wrote the test scripts against, that they are supposed to automate. It's understandable, but it's also it's again the hardest form of automation there is, and especially if you want to get it right and to get it fast.
That makes total sense to me. We see it as well with our customers where it's very intuitive to do what you say, which is start with what the user sees and just start automating there, right? So let's say I've got a manual regression suite of tests and there's like 20 or 30 of them, and you start automating that, and those are typically end-to-end tests through the whole user journey via the UI. The challenge is then once you automate those, certain things start popping up, right? The first 5 tests might be easy to automate. The following 10 might be a bit harder. And then once you hit 100, it becomes an unmaintainable mess of tests that are the automated build that if you run it, because we've got some customers that they don't necessarily run those tests continuously in a CI/CD loop or pipeline or build. But if you run them, they're pretty much all the time read, and you got to start making judgments. Well, this test is read twice a week or 3 times a week. What does it mean? Well, it's going to take a week to investigate it. We don't have that time, right? Etc. Etc. I'm guessing you're talking about those things, right? Like people start with this concept, let's just automate the manual regression suite of tests, which sounds like a good bet, and might be in some cases, but then you got to think about what are the implications of decisions we make today, especially that it might look very easy to automate the first 5 or 10 tests or 20 tests, but once you reach 100, 200, or even more, you start seeing that it's not that great, and there's a lot of problems we haven't thought about. And looking back from the things that we talked about, which is solid principles, dry, KISS, DDD, etc., etc., those problems have been actually solved, right? And I like a lot that you're focusing on going back to what you said about the trends, right? Let's make engineering a trend and go back to the principles of engineering.
Ooh,
That
I'm going to steal that.
still what? Sorry.
Let's make engineering. I like that.
You're
So
welcome to steal that.
wow, I can focus on the things I find important and be trendy. Awesome.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah, so I've got a talk in a month and a half with this forum called Tech and Excellence, and they are actually focusing on those trends again, right? They talk about hexagonal architecture, clean architecture, etc., TDD, etc., right?
I've done a talk with them late last year. It's
There you go.
Valentina's.
So I think there you go, right? Yeah. So I think
No,
Valentina, that's her principle, right? Let's talk about the basics again, right? Those are some examples of the basics.
It's what I love the work that she's doing in that space. Yeah, absolutely. I should attend more of the talks because not all of them are are equally relevant to what I do. But what I absolutely love is that all of the talks there are focused on engineering, good engineering principles and practices, rather than just running after the latest trends. So yeah.
I think
Awesome.
I like a lot what you said about the talking to people and developers. That's a really important skill, to find this common language across teams, to make sure that we're actually on the same team, right? It might look like you're an automation tester that sits somewhere at a desk, but we're actually doing the same thing, right? Which is deliver the product to customers.
If you're working in automation, if you're writing automation, you are a developer. You're developing stuff. So it's probably going to be very helpful to speak that language and to know what doing software development, what being a developer, what that entails. So, and again, that's equally true if you're doing it using a low-code platform. You are developing software. It's software that verifies, tests other software. That doesn't make it any less software development.
Yeah, I like that analogy as well. You don't see the code yourself, but there's actually code under the hood, right?
Yep, exactly.
I enjoyed this a lot, Bas. I think we should do this again.
I would absolutely love to.
So I like I like what I've learned today. I like this analogy about that the load code or no code tools are actually just your programming, just at a different abstraction level, and that makes total sense to me. Yeah, I like that analogy a lot. If people would like to learn more from Bas, how can they find you?
So 2 ways probably. LinkedIn is a good way. I try to be a little bit less active on there, but I'm failing horribly. And it's still a good platform to get in touch with me, like-minded people. So you can find me on there, or go to my website on testautomation.com. You'll find the contact phone. You find my email address there. So
Awesome.
That's
And rest
probably a good
assured,
way.
I'm guessing is on GitHub, or
Yes.
restassured.net is going to be on GitHub. So we'll link those things, the contact details to Bas and to restassured.net in the details here. Thanks a lot, Bas. Again, I enjoyed this a lot and looking forward to the next chat.
Thank you so much for having me, Bas Dijkstra. It was absolutely my pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you.